You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. G'day everyone. Welcome to today's podcast on how to dispel negative narratives using acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. I want to give everybody an opportunity to get a bit of an experience how different types of therapies approach this whole issue about negative narratives. And so today, as I said, I'm going to be looking at this through the eyes of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. In the next podcast, I'm going to set it up as if we're doing an REBT session in a sense. Not an entire session, but just an approach from that particular perspective. And in the third one, I want to take it a little bit further. I want to take a look at negative narratives through the lens of Zen. Because I think it's important that, as consumers perhaps, or as clients in the mental health space, we get a sort of feel about the different types of therapies. And there's now a whole bunch of stuff out there, all with these letters like EMDR, ACT, REBT, EFT, and so on. It's become quite a sort of trend in a way. And I think it's important that we get a feel for what suits each of us as an individual, because, not everything is going to fit everybody. We have all different ways of processing, different beliefs, attitudes that actually have quite a significant impact on how we, digest what comes up for us in therapy. Okay? So let me explain a little bit more about ACT, which is a form of therapy that helps us to learn how to accept our negative thoughts and feelings rather than trying to fight against them. It's one of the things that I found quite attractive about this coming out of training in REBT, which can be at times quite confrontational. And similarly, Gestalt therapy has a more sort of upfront approach to challenging yourself. Okay? Now, essentially, ACT is also about learning how to live in the present moment. And again, that's something that I found very attractive about this type of therapy. And, to then take that into making committed action towards our values, despite the negative thoughts or feelings that we may be experiencing. And I think that connection is actually fundamentally important. I often talk about values-based parenting, values-based therapy, alignment therapy, which brings up the question, what is it that I'm aligning? So to better understand how ACT can help us dispel negative narratives, let's take a bit of a walk through the 6 core processes of ACT. And again, this is quite nice. It's a bit of an elegant approach. So process 1. In process 1, we're contacting the present moment. And it's the first core process of ACT is exactly that. It's about learning how to be fully present in the here and now, rather than getting lost in our thoughts, our worries, our pessimisms, the mentalizing about stuff. By being present, we can learn to observe our negative narratives rather than getting caught up in them. Let's not get, if it was a Buddhist orientation, I'll talk a little bit about this in Zen, it's about being non-attached. So what's process 2? Well, process 2 is about diffusion. Diffusion is about learning how to separate ourselves from our thoughts and see them for what they are, which is just words and mental events that I'm conjuring up. It's my internal fairy tale that's going on. Now, by diffusing from our thoughts, we can learn how to observe them without getting attached to them. And this is actually a central process in meditative mindfulness approaches. Acceptance is process 3. And acceptance is about learning how to accept our thoughts and feelings rather than trying to fight against them. By accepting our thoughts and feelings, we can learn to observe them without judgment or resistance. And in the way that I work in therapy, I quite often talk about a non-attachment and a suspension of my beliefs and attitudes towards what it is that I'm thinking and feeling. You know, we tend to get ourselves into serious trouble a lot of the times because I'm judging, invalidating what I'm actually experiencing. Oh, I shouldn't feel anxious right now. Well, perhaps it might be more important to ask the question, why shouldn't I? Or simply to go, well, this is how I am. So I'll get into the detail about how to use that in a minute. So the fourth process is interesting because it raises something in a way that a lot of therapies, in a sense, haven't done directly. And that is the self as context. This is really about learning how to see ourselves as the observer of our thoughts and feelings, rather than getting caught up in them. By observing ourselves as the observer, we can learn how to distance ourselves from our negative narratives. It's a bit like watching the watcher. And to me, that is particularly important in many respects because the opportunity to, especially if it's really traumatic, to take a step back and another step back is I can begin to apply what I call meta processes, that is, processes above the process. So I can think about how I'm thinking, I can think about how I'm feeling in a non-judgmental, not passive, but curious way. Curiosity in this is extremely important. It aims at really opening up my mind to other possible explanations. Now, sometimes in therapy that takes quite a while to do. And the reason why I'm presenting this material in the way that I am is I want it to be as simple as possible so you can play around with it in your own lives. As I talked about, negative narratives are out there. We get inundated by them through our culture, our society, and our community. And it means that we need to be a bit critical about what it is that we're absorbing. One of the things that I brought out was the challenge about why do I need to see parenting as this sacrifice in which I throw myself on the altar of my children. That's not necessary. In fact, it makes the whole thing a lot more difficult for myself and certainly a lot more difficult for my relationship with my children. Okay, process 5, values. That magic word. So what are we talking about in the context of ACT here? In ACT, values are about identifying what's truly important to you in your life and taking committed action towards those values. By focusing on our values, we're going to learn how to take action towards our goals as well, despite the negative narrative that has been holding us back or that continues to hold us back. So, if one of my values is to grow as a human being, then I'm going to accept and acknowledge that that might come with some pain. But I'm going to be committed to pursue that in any event. I'm going to go with it. So, process 6, committed action. Now, how many times have we made a commitment and for some reason or another have found an excuse or excuses why we couldn't push it through? And this is where I also like ACT, because it's integral. My movement towards the goal is an action process. Right? So committed action is really about taking action towards our values, even when we're feeling scared or uncertain or anxious or depressed. By taking committed action, we can learn how to overcome our negative narratives, and this enriches our lives. It makes living fulfilling. We can, irrespective of the challenges, we can then start talking about thriving rather than simply surviving, which for a lot of people is a persistent challenge. Okay, so how can we apply these processes? Let's make the assumption that your negative narrative tells you that you're not good enough to start your own business, for example. You could put in whatever you want, but let me run with this. You might have thoughts like, I don't have enough experience, or I'm not smart enough to run a business, I don't have, what it takes. And these thoughts are fundamentally holding you back from taking any form of action towards your values, which in this case may be to start your own business. Or, in my way, in the way that I construct values, it's about, fostering my, financial independence. Okay? Now let's use those 6 core processes to learn how to dispel these negative narratives and take action towards your values. So the first step is contact the present moment. Become aware of the negative narrative that you're running in your head and how it's impacting on you in the present moment. Okay, so that might be just simply a self-awareness exercise about, how you feel and what you think and what you're actually really doing. The second step is diffuse from those thoughts. In other words, take a mental step back and see the thoughts for what they are. They're just words and mental events, mental, narratives, fiction that you're creating in your mind. Because so far, I could challenge you to go, well, let's suppose you don't have enough experience. Why should that necessarily stop you from being or creating your own business? The third step in this process is then to accept those thoughts and feelings. Don't fight it, don't, push it away, don't rationalise it, don't mentalise it, don't judge it. The next step is then to see yourself as the observer in that and recognise that you are not your thoughts and that you can distance yourself from them by seeing yourself as the observer. And if necessary, take another step back and observe the observer with the thoughts. The next step is really, and this one takes a bit of time, this one might be useful to do with some pen and paper, but sit down and identify your values. Identify what's really, really important to you and why you might want to start a business. Is it to create financial stability, to pursue passion, or just to have more control in your life? Okay, so again, and my suggestion is, like goals, write them out. Right? In fact, part of that step with your values may be to begin to very clearly set out your goals and then commit yourself to action. Take small steps towards your goal, such as doing research on starting a business, reaching out to someone who can mentor you, or taking a business course at an educational institution. I think it's important to remember that it's okay to feel scared or uncertain or anxious. We've pathologized all of this to the degree where it's often inhibiting people from actually taking little bites out of the problem. What matters, though, is that you take action, and that is core. So by applying these core processes to your negative narratives, you can learn how to overcome them and create a much, much more fulfilling existence. Remember, let me come back. Negative narratives are fairy tales we tell ourselves, and they do not have to control our lives at all. They may not be true. They could be fictitious completely. They may have some foundation in truth. Now, with ACT, A-C-T, we can learn how to accept our thoughts and feelings and take actions towards our values despite them. And it's a neat system of therapy. Now, let me stress again, it's not the only system of therapy. And one of the things that I want to do with the other two is then want to come back and go, okay, in each of these therapies, what are the familiar, similar themes? Because I think often we get caught away in the novelty of a therapy and believe it to be like the be-all and end-all of therapies. I remember when neuro-linguistic programming came out, and it was sold as the one-stop to deal with phobias. And I remember reading an article, one session will fix your phobia. Not true. Most of us who are experienced therapists will understand that is a fallacious claim fundamentally. There is no one therapy to fix something in one session. It's not a drug. So just reflect on this. Sit back. Try it out. I've tried to make this as straightforward as possible so that it is, something that you could try out and use and see what difference it can make. Also, don't hesitate to go towards, resources on the internet. YouTube has some interesting videos on this as well. In any case, as always, let me inspire you to change. And hopefully your life will be richer for it. So that's all the time we have for today's podcast. I hope that you found this information helpful and that you'll think about, playing around with this. And then thanks for tuning in, and I'll speak to you in the next podcast. This is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.